The lamp is on. That's the first thing to notice, the way it always has been. That particular warmth it makes against the ceiling, the way it settles the room into something smaller and more manageable than the world outside. You may have been here before. In fact, you have been here before, 5 times now, and the room has the feeling of a place that knows you a little. The chair is in the same place. The table is the same table. The window holds its dark rectangle of sky, and the light from the lamp doesn't reach quite as far as the glass. It's a familiar room. There's a quality to that familiarity that's worth sitting in for a moment. When you return to a room many times, you stop noticing it the way you noticed it the first time. You stop seeing it fresh. But sometimes on a particular evening, a last evening, or an evening that feels different from the others, the familiarity becomes something else. Not dullness, more like recognition. Like looking at a face you know very well and seeing it clearly again. This is the 6th evening, and that's how this room feels tonight. There's a weight to saying that, though it isn't a heavy weight. It's more like the feeling you get when you realize a book you've loved is almost finished. Not dread, nothing like that. Not urgency. More like a quiet awareness, an attentiveness to the fact that tonight we'll turn the last pages of this particular volume, and that deserves a particular kind of sitting still. The book is on the table. It has been on this table since we first sat down together, and we've added to it, evening by evening, the way you add notes in the margins of something you return to over and over. The spine is familiar now. The cover has the look of something that's been handled with care, picked up and set down, opened and closed, kept close through many evenings. And tonight we're going to sit here, in this room, with all of it beside us, and not rush. There's something to the quality of a last evening that is distinct from all the others. In the middle of a season, each evening carries the sense of continuation. More to come, more to explore, the pleasurable knowledge that there are still pages waiting. A last evening is something else. It becomes its own kind of gift. The room holds everything that came before, and all you have to do is settle into it and look. So let's do that. Let's not move too quickly. Let's let the lamp do its work, and let the room gather around us, and let the book sit there on the table being exactly what it is. A thing we made together, page by page, evening by evening, in the good company of questions we were not afraid to hold. We're here. The room is quiet. The lamp is on. And this is the 6th evening. Tonight is not a night for new discoveries. I want to say that clearly, so we can both relax into it. There's no new chapter we need to open tonight. No new term to understand. No new diagram to place carefully in our minds. Tonight, we are stepping back from the page and looking at the shelf, at the 5 volumes we've arranged across 5 evenings. And we're noticing how they hold each other up. It's a different kind of seeing. When you're in the middle of a book, you're close to the sentences. You're inside the particular word on the particular page. Tonight we get to stand a little farther back and see the whole arrangement. The way the spines line up, the way each volume has its place, the way they make a kind of sense together that none of them made alone. We've been building something, evening by evening. You may not have noticed it as it was happening, because that's how building works. It looks like particular steps, not like a structure, until you step back and see the structure. Tonight we can see the structure. The question we've been sitting with through all 5 evenings is this: what does it mean that most of the universe is made of things we can't directly see? We've turned that question over from many angles. We've held it in many kinds of light. We've looked at what we know and what we suspect and what we simply don't know yet. We've looked at it from the inside, from within the 5%, wondering about the rest, and from what perspective we can manage from here. We're not going to solve that question tonight. I want to be gentle but clear about that. The solving isn't what tonight is for. Tonight is for sitting with the question itself, for noticing what it feels like to have explored it as carefully as we have, and for understanding that living with not knowing is not the same thing as living without knowledge. We know a great deal. We've placed a great deal carefully on the shelf, and most of it points towards something vast, something patient, something that doesn't owe us answers but doesn't withhold them either. Here in our quiet room, with all 5 evenings resting on the shelf beside us, that feels like enough. More than enough, actually. It feels like something worth sitting still with. Let me walk you through what we've placed there. We opened the book and found that most of it was written in ink we couldn't read. That was the first evening's gift, and it was a strange one. We expected, or perhaps we assumed, which is a little different, to find a universe composed of familiar things. The atoms that make up chairs and water and the morning light coming through a window. The cells inside us, the air we move through, the ground beneath us. We have some understanding of those things, hard-won understanding, built across centuries of careful looking. We expected to find more of that. Instead, we found that the familiar things are a thin note written at the front of a very long book. 5 pages in 100 are written in ink we can read. The rest, the vast, patient majority of the book, is something else. Something that doesn't shine, doesn't absorb light the way ordinary matter does, doesn't speak to our instruments in any of the ordinary languages we've learned over all those centuries of careful looking. That first evening, we sat with the strangeness of it. Not the details, but the fact itself. The universe is mostly made of things we can't see. We're embedded in a reality that our senses can barely touch, and our senses were shaped by everything ordinary matter had to offer, not by the invisible, which turns out to be the majority. We are specialized for reading 5% of the book, and the other 95% is written in languages we're only beginning to suspect exist. Back here by the lamp, that fact is still as strange as it was the first night. I haven't gotten used to it. I'm not sure I want to. There's something worth keeping in the freshness of that strangeness. The willingness to let it be strange, even now, even after 5 evenings of looking at it from many angles. The strangeness is real. It belongs to the thing itself. The second evening, we learned that the blank pages aren't truly blank. Something is written there. We can't read it directly, can't point a detector at it and say, there, that word, that sentence, that's what the invisible is made of. But we can feel the weight of it on the page. Galaxies that should have scattered long ago instead stay gathered, held together by something that exerts the pull of gravity without any of the other properties we associate with ordinary matter. A web of structure shapes the large-scale layout of everything we can see, running through the universe like the framework of a house, visible only through its effects on what rests against it. We couldn't read the words, but we could feel the weight of them. That's how the second evening felt. Not a lapse in seeing, but a kind of oblique seeing, like noticing a heavy object because of the impression it leaves in a cushion, not because you can see the object itself. The impression is real, the weight is real, the something there is real, and there's a precision to how we know it. The weight isn't vague or approximate, it has a ratio. The invisible scaffolding is several times more massive than all the ordinary matter in the universe, all the stars, all the gas, all the atoms of every kind that have ever formed in the history of everything. The invisible is not just slightly more, it is dominantly more. The ordinary is the minority in a universe shaped by something we can't see. Back here by the lamp, that weight is still present. We don't need to see it to know it. That knowing, that oblique and confident knowing, is itself a kind of understanding. It's the kind of understanding the universe rewards when we pay close enough attention to what it's doing, rather than what we expect it to do. The third evening, we looked at what the invisible writing might say. We brought out what the researchers have proposed. Particles that move slowly and quietly through the universe, interacting only through gravity and perhaps one other force, leaving no footprints in ordinary detectors and no impressions on light as it passes through. Fields that pervade everything without announcing themselves. Remnants of the universe's earliest moments. Fossils of conditions that lasted only a fraction of a second near the very beginning, when the rules of matter were being established for the first time. Each one a possibility resting on the shelf, none confirmed. Each one waiting patiently for the instrument or the observation that will either bring it into the light or return it to the margin. We looked at each of them carefully that evening, tried to understand what it would mean if any of them turned out to be right, and discovered that each answer would bring its own new set of questions, which is, of course, how this works. That evening taught us something more than the candidates themselves. It taught us patience. The universe doesn't rush its answers. We can propose and refine and test and wait, and the universe simply continues being what it is, whether or not we've guessed correctly. The candidates sit on the shelf regardless. The universe contains what it contains. Patience. That's what that evening was about. The patience to hold a possibility without collapsing it into either proof or dismissal. The fourth evening we turned to a different kind of invisible entirely. It wasn't hidden inside things the way dark matter seems to be, not embedded in the invisible scaffolding between the galaxies, not a particle or field drifting through ordinary space. It was something more fundamental. It was a property of space itself, something pressing outward from within the fabric of the universe, as though space itself had a preference for expanding rather than remaining still. We discovered that the book isn't static. It's growing, gently, patiently, stretching in all directions at once. Not because of anything inside it, but because the space between the pages is widening. The pages themselves are being carried apart. A galaxy on one page and a galaxy on another are not moving through space so much as the space between them is quietly, steadily increasing. Dark energy, the cosmological constant, the simplest name we have for the thing we understand least. We turned it over carefully that evening, placed it on the shelf with care, and admitted that even the medium, even the paper, even the binding, even the space the book exists inside, is part of the mystery. We're not only reading a text we can't fully see, we're reading a text in an ink whose material we don't understand, in a volume whose structure is itself unknown, whose edges we can't locate. That's a particular kind of wonder. Not threatening, nothing like that. Something more like awe at the scale of what we're inside. Last time, we asked whether the push is the same push it's always been. We met a new instrument, a careful and systematic mapmaker, laying down the positions of millions of galaxies across enormous distances, building a three-dimensional portrait of the universe's structure that has never existed before. And that mapmaker offered us something interesting. A hint, not an answer. A hint that the gentle push might not be as constant as the simplest explanation requires. That it might be changing, evolving slowly across cosmic time. Something more dynamic than a fixed property of space that never varies. The researchers are cautious about that hint. They discuss it carefully. They look at what the data can support and what it can't. They compare it against other measurements and other methods, and they find that the question is genuinely open in a way that careful science keeps open. Not refusing to answer, but not pretending the evidence is more definitive than it is. Hints, not answers, and not the last hints either. The instrument is still gathering. The data are still being examined by careful hands. There will be more. We left the question open last time, because the question is still open. The telescopes are watching. The data are accumulating. And we placed a bookmark in a page that is still turning. A page whose next line hasn't been written yet, or hasn't been read yet, which amounts to the same thing for us. And here we are, the 6th evening, all 5 chapters on the shelf beside us. The room holds them all, and the lamp gives the same warm light it always has. So what don't we know? Let's be honest about the gaps. We don't know what dark matter is. This is worth saying plainly, without softening it into comfortable vagueness. We've confirmed that something is there. We've confirmed it's not made of the ordinary atoms we are made of, not light we've missed, not compact objects hiding in plain sight. We've eliminated possibilities one by one, narrowing the territory where the answer might live. And the most sensitive detectors ever built, chambers of extraordinary quiet, buried deep underground, shielded from every background they could be shielded from, have been listening carefully for years. They haven't heard anything. This isn't a shortcoming. That framing doesn't belong here. But it is an honest gap, and the gaps deserve honest acknowledgement. The something there is real. The what it is remains unknown. There's a detail worth carrying gently from this search. The detectors have become so sensitive that they're now picking up neutrinos, tiny, nearly massless particles streaming continuously from our own sun in extraordinary quantities. That's actually remarkable. The instruments are so quiet, so attuned to the faintest possible signals, that the whisper of the sun itself is now audible from deep underground. That background whisper makes the search harder, in the way that a familiar sound in the room makes it harder to hear a sound from outside the room. The instruments have to learn to listen past the familiar in order to catch something new. So far, that something new hasn't spoken. The search continues. the chambers remain open and quiet and waiting. We don't know what dark energy is. The simplest explanation, a fixed energy of space itself, uniform and unchanging since long before any galaxy formed, fits most of the data well. But the hints from recent surveys suggest there may be more structure to the story, that the push might have varied over time, that the simplest explanation might be a very good approximation of something slightly more complicated. And there is a disagreement, a careful, ongoing, deeply interesting disagreement between different methods of measuring how quickly the universe is currently expanding. Different approaches, using different instruments and different reference objects, arrive at numbers that don't quite agree with each other. Either one of the methods has a systematic error that hasn't been found yet, or the universe is doing something that our current picture doesn't fully include. Here by the lamp, we can hold those gaps without anxiety. They're not cracks in the floor, they're doorways. Each gap is a place where the next chapter is waiting, not hidden maliciously, but simply not yet reached. The history of cosmology is a history of revised expectations. A century ago, the settled picture was a static universe, vast, eternal, changeless. The idea of a universe with a history, a universe that began differently than it is now, and will end differently than it currently appears, wasn't part of the standard account. The stars were old and stable. The arrangement of the sky felt permanent. Then careful measurements came in, and redshifts accumulating across many distant objects, and the static universe gave way to an expanding one. The revision was profound. It changed what questions were even askable. 70 years later, the settled picture was an expanding universe that was slowing down, stretched thin by the energy of ordinary matter, gradually decelerating under the pull of gravity toward whatever comes next. Then the observations came in, mapping distant events across time, and finding that the universe's expansion wasn't slowing at all. It was speeding up. The decelerating universe gave way to the accelerating universe, and the revision was, again, profound. Each generation builds on the previous one. Each generation's certainties become the next generation's starting points, and sometimes the next generation's surprises. Each generation discovers that what they took as the whole picture was a chapter, a beautifully coherent, carefully assembled chapter, inside a book that turned out to be longer and stranger and more detailed than they expected. The pattern is consistent enough that it deserves to be taken seriously. Each generation opens the book expecting to find the last chapter, and instead finds a new volume. If history is any guide, and it is a thoughtful guide if not a perfect one, the next surprise is already in the data somewhere. It may be the disagreement in expansion measurements. It may be something the next generation of instruments will reveal. It may be something no one has thought to look for yet. That's not unsettling, or at least it doesn't have to be. The universe has consistently turned out to be more interesting than our current picture of it. That pattern, taken seriously, is its own kind of reassurance. Not knowing isn't a burden. It's a sign that the story is still being written. Richard Feynman, one of the most careful and playful thinkers physics has produced, said something I've been carrying through this entire season, something that belongs in this room tonight. He said, "I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong." I want to sit with that for a moment, because it's easy to pass over it too quickly. He's not celebrating ignorance. He's not suggesting that questions don't matter or that the search isn't worth conducting. He's saying something more precise and more interesting, that a false answer is worse than an open question, that the comfort of a finished book is the comfort of something closed, and closed things don't grow, that the willingness to remain genuinely uncertain, to hold a question as a question, rather than collapsing it prematurely into an answer, is actually a kind of intellectual courage and a kind of pleasure. Imagine if we knew everything. The book would be done, every page filled in, every margin annotated, every footnote explained, every question resolved. There would be nothing left to discover, no new instrument to design, no new question to formulate, no morning where a data point arrives and changes the shape of what we thought we understood. No more evenings like this one, sitting together with a chapter we haven't fully read, wondering what it might contain. Which would you rather hold? A book with every page filled and nowhere left to go, or one with most of its chapters still being written? The universe is patient. It doesn't mind that we haven't solved it. It's been keeping its own counsel for nearly 14 billion years, and it will continue to do so. The questions remain open, the instruments keep listening, and we don't need the answers tonight. Here in our quiet room, we can rest with that. The questions are real, the search is real, and the not knowing is part of the gift. But the work continues. Let's look at what's still being written. Even as we sit here, the work is ongoing. There's something steadying about that. Not urgent, nothing like a countdown or a deadline, but a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the instruments don't pause. That somewhere, right now, at this moment, telescopes are open to the night sky, gathering light from distances that take billions of years to cross. Detectors are underground in the deep quiet, listening for something they haven't heard yet. Computers are sorting through the shapes of galaxies mapped across years of patient observation, looking for patterns that might not be visible to any single mind, but emerge only when many careful minds work together on the same body of evidence. The instrument we learned about in our last evening, the careful mapmaker, the one building a three-dimensional portrait of the universe's large-scale structure, is completing its 5-year survey in the coming months. The most detailed such portrait ever assembled will be finished and in the hands of the researchers who will spend years drawing meaning from it. That portrait may tell us whether the gentle push has changed over cosmic time, and if so, by how much and in what direction. It may strengthen the hints of the most recent analysis, or it may revise them in ways that neither confirm nor dismiss the question, but rather refine it. We don't know which. That's exactly as it should be. A telescope mapping the sky from space, patient and orbiting, free from the blurring effects of our atmosphere, will release its first major cosmology results later this year. Fresh measurements, fresh mapping, fresh eyes looking at how matter is distributed across the universe and how the expansion has unfolded across time. What those eyes see may settle some of the ongoing questions, or it may open new ones. Either outcome moves the work forward. And the Roman Space Telescope, launching next year, will open a window onto the early universe vastly wider than anything we've had before. A view 100 times larger, reaching back across time to conditions we've only been able to glimpse at the edges of what current instruments can reach. What lives in that wider view we don't yet know. Underground, the next generation of dark matter detectors is being designed and planned. Larger chambers, deeper quiet, finer instruments, reaching further into the silence, listening for something quieter than anything we've been able to detect yet. Not with urgency, but with the patience of work that knows it might take time and is prepared to take the time it needs. New reading glasses, better light, more careful hands turning the pages. The work continues whether or not we're watching. That's one of the things I find most settling about science as a human activity, that it is passed from hand to hand, a community endeavor that doesn't depend on any single person's attention or persistence. The work was happening before we sat down together. It will continue after we close the book tonight. Within the next few years, we may have answers we don't have now. We may learn whether dark energy is truly constant, a fixed property of space that has always been exactly as it is, or whether it has varied across cosmic time. If it has varied, that variation will tell us something profound about the nature of space itself, something that the simplest explanation couldn't predict and couldn't explain. The distinction matters. It changes what kind of universe we're in. We may detect the particle, or field, or structure that dark matter is made of. If we do, it will be one of the most consequential discoveries in a long time of consequential discoveries. It will change the questions we can ask about the very early universe, and about how structure formed, and about what the future of the cosmos might look like. Or we may find that whatever dark matter is, it interacts even more quietly than our current instruments can reach, and we'll need to imagine entirely new approaches, new questions, new geometries of search, new ways of listening. We may resolve the disagreement between different measures of expansion, or we may find that resolving it requires something the current picture doesn't include, a new chapter that no one has drafted yet, a revision that changes what came before without erasing it. The questions are getting sharper, the instruments are getting more sensitive, and the universe is still out there, being what it is, whether or not we're paying attention. We might be surprised. We've been surprised before, not once or twice, but repeatedly, as a pattern, as a feature of how this kind of searching tends to go. The universe has consistently turned out to be more detailed and more strange than the most careful minds of each era expected. There's no particular reason to think that pattern has ended. The book still has unread chapters, and we're building better reading lamps. Here, by the lamp, we can trust that the work will continue. People we'll never meet are already planning the observations and experiments that might change the shape of the next volume. That's its own kind of gift, the knowledge that the story belongs to more than any one of us, that it's larger than any single season of reading. But tonight isn't about the future. It's about what it means to be here, now, in this particular moment. Here by the lamp, made of the 5%, reading about the 95. That's actually what's happening right now, in this room. The lamp itself is made of atoms, the filament or the circuitry, the glass, the wire, the switch. Atoms organized into something that produces light. The chair is made of atoms, the table is made of atoms, the book on the table, the paper, the ink, the binding, all of it, atoms. And we ourselves, sitting here in the quiet of this late hour, thinking and wondering and listening, are made of atoms too. atoms organized into something that can look outward at the universe and wonder about the rest. Carl Sagan, who thought as carefully and as warmly as almost anyone about what it means to be a small and particular thing inside a vast and mostly unknown cosmos, said something that belongs in this room tonight. He said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." That line has the quality of a room anchor if you sit with it long enough. The cosmos is mostly dark matter, mostly dark energy, mostly things we can't see, can't directly touch, can't bring into the ordinary light of experience. And yet, in the 5%, something assembled itself. Through a long and patient process of stars forming and scattering their contents, and new stars forming from the scattered contents, into beings capable of asking questions about the 95, capable of building instruments and analyzing data, and wondering, in a quiet room late at night, what the invisible is made of. We sit in this room, made of atoms, surrounded by a house made of atoms, in a universe that is mostly made of something else entirely. And here we are, asking questions about it. There's something remarkable in that. Not humbling exactly, or not only humbling, more like wondrous. Like the discovery that the small thing you are is not separate from the vastness you're trying to understand. You're part of the same story. You are the chapter the story has written to read itself. Back here by the lamp, that feels worth holding for a moment. Just letting it sit in the warm light alongside everything else we've placed on the shelf tonight. Every civilization that looked at the sky knew it was looking at something vast and mostly hidden. Ancient astronomers mapped the patterns of stars without knowing the stars were suns. They tracked their movements across seasons, built instruments of remarkable precision to follow the wandering lights through the fixed ones, assembled calendar systems and navigational charts and mythologies that tried to make sense of what they saw. Their observations were careful, their records were often extraordinary, and they understood almost nothing about what the lights actually were, what burned inside them, how far away they stood, what relation they bore to the warmth of our own daylight sky. Hubble, in the 1920s, measured the redshift of distant objects without knowing that the accelerating expansion of the universe was waiting to be found. He saw something real and reported it carefully and contributed to a revolution in understanding. But the implications of what he saw took decades to unfold, and some of those implications hadn't even been imagined when he was working. Perlmutter and Schmidt and Rees, in the late 1990s, set out to measure the rate at which the expansion was slowing, a question they thought they understood well enough to go study carefully. What they found was that the expansion wasn't slowing at all, it was speeding up. The question they went in to answer was not the question they came out with. Each generation sees a little more. Each generation's everything turns out to be a fraction of what comes next. We're in that position now precisely. We see 5%. We've confirmed the other 95% exists and acts on the things we can see. We know the blank pages hold something real. We just haven't learned to read them yet. Back here by the lamp, we're part of that chain. We're the generation that confirmed what the blank pages contain. Not the words, but the weight of the words. The generation that first caught hints that the push might be evolving. What the next generation makes of those hints, and what they discover when they look even more carefully at what we've found, we can only begin to imagine. You don't need to understand dark matter to live well. That seems worth saying plainly, in this room, on this last evening of the season. You don't need to solve the vacuum energy puzzle to sleep tonight, or to find meaning in tomorrow, or to feel that your particular life inside the 5% is a worthwhile one. The questions we've been exploring across 5 evenings are real and important and fascinating, and they will be investigated by careful people for a long time to come. But none of them require your personal resolution. They're not a burden you've been handed. What they are, and this is what I want to offer in these last pages before we close the book, is an invitation. An invitation to notice that the reality we're embedded in is vastly larger and more interesting than any account of it we've yet managed to write. An invitation to find that enlarging rather than diminishing. An invitation to let the not knowing be a kind of spaciousness rather than a kind of gap. There's something deeply human about wanting to know, about looking at the night sky and asking questions. Not because the answers are immediately useful, not because knowing what dark matter is will change the quality of tomorrow morning, but because the wanting to know is part of what we are. We've been doing it for as long as we've been doing anything that looks like culture and civilization, and probably longer than that, when the impulse was less articulate but no less real. The questions aren't burdens, they're gifts. Each one is a doorway in this house that hasn't been opened yet. Not locked, not forbidden, just not yet reached. The house has many rooms, and many hallways, and many doors, and some of them we've walked through this season and found other rooms inside with their own doors. And some of the doorways are still at the end of the hallway, simply waiting. The universe is not secretive. It doesn't withhold its answers out of spite or indifference. It simply has more rooms than we've had time to find. It leaves clues. The clues are real and detectable and meaningful, and we've found some of them together across 5 evenings. We just haven't found all of them yet, and there's no particular reason to expect we would have. Here in our quiet room, the doorways wait. They're not going anywhere, and neither is the universe, which is patient in a way that makes our occasional urgency look like a very particular and very human kind of charm. Let's close the book. The book is on the table. It was on the table the first night when we opened it and found the blank pages and sat with the strangeness of the fact that most of the universe is made of things we can't see. It was on the table the second evening when we learned that the blank pages have weight. It's been on the table every evening since, through the candidates and the gentle push and the hints of change and all the careful conversations in between. It has stayed in its place, on this table, in this light, while we've done the slow work of reading it as carefully as we could. We opened this book 6 evenings ago. We've turned its pages slowly, the way you turn pages when you want the reading to last. We've read what we could and marked what we couldn't yet understand, and placed small, careful notes in the margins where we wanted to remember something. The book is different now than it was when we first sat down together. Not its contents, we didn't add to those, but our relationship to it. We know it better now. We've spent time with it. Now it's time to close it. Not because the story is finished. It isn't, not even close. The story has been unfolding for nearly 14 billion years and will continue unfolding for far longer than any of us can hold in mind. The work of reading it has been ongoing for a few centuries in its current careful form, and there are long chapters still ahead. The story, is very much ongoing. But we've read enough for one season. And there's a rightness to closing a book at the right moment. Not when it's finished, but when you've taken in as much as you can hold, and you want to rest with what you've found before you reach for more. Let me trace the thread one last time from the beginning. We noticed the blank pages, the fact that most of the universe is written in an ink our instruments can't yet read, that the familiar 5% of ordinary matter is a small note at the front of a very long book. We confirmed that something is written in the rest of the pages, something real and weighty and structurally important, even if we can't see it directly. We looked at the candidates for what that writing might say, the possibilities resting on the shelf, each one waiting for the observation that will confirm or revise it. We discovered that the pages themselves are expanding, that the book is growing gently in all directions, not because of anything written inside it, but because of something woven through the space between the words. We explored what that expansion might be made of, whether it's a fixed and unchanging property of space or something more dynamic. And we found that the question is genuinely open, that hints are accumulating, and that the clearest answers are still being gathered by the instruments that are watching even now. And tonight, we sat with the whole picture, the knowing and the not knowing, placed side by side on the table. The things we've confirmed and the things we haven't found yet. The instruments that are working and the questions that are getting sharper. The history of revision that tells us the next surprise is waiting somewhere in the data. And the particular pleasure of living at a moment when that surprise hasn't arrived yet. This is the book of the missing 95%. Most of it is still unread, but we know it's there. We know the blank pages hold something real, and that knowledge, the confident knowledge that the invisible is real, that the questions are meaningful, that the search is worth conducting and is being conducted with care, is itself a kind of beginning. Not an end, a beginning. We leave the season at a threshold, with 5 volumes on the shelf, and the hallway continuing. The lamp is still burning. The room is still here, as it has been across 6 evenings. The chair, the table, the window with its quiet dark beyond the glass. The shelves hold everything we've discussed, the dark matter and the dark energy, the candidates and the hints and the open questions, the history of revised certainties and the pattern of recurring surprise. All of it is still there, and it will be there when you want to return to any part of it. You don't need to hold any of it tonight. That's not what tonight is for. It will all be here when you come back to it. The instruments will keep watching, the map makers and the space telescopes, and the underground chambers listening in the quiet. The researchers will keep analyzing, the data will keep accumulating. The work doesn't require your vigilance to continue. It is happening, steadily and patiently, whether we're attending to it or not. The universe is patient. It has been unfolding for nearly 14 billion years, and it has been entirely unconcerned with whether any particular observer was paying attention on any particular evening. It will continue unfolding. The rooms we haven't found yet will still be there. The doorways in the hallway will still be waiting. The blank pages will still hold what they hold. It won't mind if you rest. The book is on the table. The lamp is low. And outside, in the vast quiet between the galaxies, the pages are still turning, gently, patiently, whether anyone is reading or not. Rest well.